We can divorce if you want, but let me live with our son." After berating me extensively, John looked satisfied as he took a deep breath. As I pondered on how to retort, our son, who had been waiting in the background, stepped forward. "If you don't know, Dad, let me tell you. That person is..." Pointing at his father's mistress, our son spat out words that made me break into a cheeky smile. "My name is Jennifer. I turned 42 this year. Currently, I'm a freelance illustrator while doing housework. I've been married for 15 years and have a son who's in 8th grade this year. Ever since we got married, John has been jumping from job to job, not lasting very long. We mostly live off my income. To raise our son, a steady income is needed, so I've worked hard to make ends meet while also taking care of him. Balancing housework, child raising, and my job, I had to work from home. John often left home for sporadic short-term jobs, making it impossible for me to leave our child behind and work outside. At first, being a newbie to the freelance world was tough, but now, the results are evident, and I'm confident about my stable income and consistent work. Thanks to referrals from former clients, I've landed new projects. In these new assignments, I'm responsible for illustrating educational magazines and brochures. Now that David has grown up and I don't have to look after him as much as I used to, I not only work from home but also manage to go out for work a few times a week. Thus, the three of us live together harmoniously, but there's something that's been bothering me. It's about John. Seeing that I've been earning steadily, John doesn't seem eager to find a new job and has been quite aimless. I'm always worried if it's okay for him at 44 to be living like this. He rarely works full-time, so he should have some free time, but John doesn't help much with housework or child raising. It's been like this since we got married, so I've kinda given up on it. He doesn't seem to be interested in our son, David, who's now in those challenging teenage years, which annoys me. David may not be very talkative and seems distant, but there are times when he helps with the chores when I'm not looking. Maybe he's seen me juggling work and household chores since he was little, so he's the kind of boy who voluntarily offers to help. David has grown up so much, but John, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have matured at all. Lately, John's been coming home late more often, and I guess I've been holding on to some unease and frustration. It's only natural to be suspicious. Even on days when I don't think he's scheduled to work, he says he has to go for work reasons. But I can't imagine he's secretly job hunting without telling us. There are other things he does that make me suspicious. For the past few months, though John hasn't been looking after David much, he's become keen on picking him up and dropping him off at his basketball club. Even though David is just in 8th grade, given the dangers of today's world, our household rule is to always drop off and pick up. I've always been the one squeezing this into my work schedule, but lately, for some reason, John started offering to do it. I appreciate the help with the pickups and drop-offs, but something felt off. I happened to realize the nature of my suspicion by chance when I passed by the place David goes to. I decided to take a different route home for a change of pace after shopping. In front of the place David goes to, I saw John, who wasn't supposed to be there. He had said he'd be late tonight because of work out of town. John was chatting happily with a woman who looked like one of the staffs from the basketball facility in front of the building. I had a bad feeling, and as I stared at the two of them, the woman noticed me and tilted her head, calling out, "Excuse me, are you David's mom?" "Yes, my son always been in your care. Thank you," I responded, nodding slightly awkwardly to the woman who was talking cutesy. Though I had seen her a few times during drop-offs and pickups, I didn't remember all the faces of the staff. I was wondering which duties she does here. Ignoring my husband who looked rigid and tense, I made small talk with her. The woman introduced herself as Jessica. Isn't it usual to introduce herself with not only name, but also what she's in charge of my child in such situations? Noticing my puzzled expression, my husband seemed to hurry to end their conversation. On the way home, we didn't speak, and it felt like he was purposely avoiding me. Even though he seemed to enjoy talking to Jessica so much, while walking beside me, he was deliberately looking down, avoiding eye contact. I could tell something was up. His late returns recently and his eagerness to do the drop-offs and pickups, combined with his strange behavior after being spotted, made me believe that woman, Jessica, had something to do with it. Is he having an affair with that slightly younger woman? Somewhere in my heart, I knew. I had sensed the change. Ever since he started doing the drop-offs and pickups, he had become noticeably distant from me. That day, when our son returned from the basketball club, I casually inquired about his father's behavior. However, the only response I got from him was a curt and he was like I dunno. It seemed my son was pretty darn annoyed about his dad wanting to drive him to and from the facility every day. Chasing after our reluctant son and forcing him to there just didn't seem right. I've started to cast suspicious glances at him for some time now. And those suspicions were gonna be proven right soon enough. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd drop in. David, how are you feeling? Thank you for coming all this way, Jessica. Now, please have some coffee. Jessica, whom I had not suspected of being my husband's mistress, began to find excuses to visit our home more and more. She would mention our son now and then, but that was clearly just a pretext. She always appeared during the hours my husband was home, not me or my son. Watching the two of them conversing cheerfully in the living room, I was sure of John's infidelity. A month after I began to notice something odd about my husband's behavior, he started coming home later and later, sometimes leaving the house for a few days at a time. I'd subtly asked him what he was up to as he had stealthily come home late the night before, when I pointed out that his body that had sunk into the sofa quivered. Jokingly, I was like, at least spare me the cheating, and laughed it off, but John suddenly stood up and glared at me. You just stick to your work. I'm taking care of David, so don't pry into it unnecessarily. Whether it was the way I asked or something else, he seemed irritated, and he left the living room with a sigh. I was furious to be told as if he was doing everything when he had left all the housework and David to me. What's the matter, Mom? David, who had been watching our petty quarrels and squabbles, unusually spoke up. Oh, it's nothing. What about you, David? Why are you up at this hour? Coming out of his room, David stared at me intently before slowly opening his mouth. Hesitantly, he told me about the female staff who he thought might be his father's mistress. According to David, Jessica would cling to him a lot at the facility. David, who found it utterly annoying, would ignore her, but he was frustrated that she would come to our house. I disliked it as well, so it was obvious that my son would be annoyed by someone from his basketball club imposing on our home. I was relieved to know that I was not the only one who disliked it, but the problem was far from solved. When I returned home from a client meeting, I could hear joyful conversation from the living room. It was the voices of John and Jessica. David was probably holed up in his room, as there was no sign of him joining the conversation. When I opened the door to the living room, both of them turned their eyes to me. John, as usual, looked uncomfortable, but Jessica smiled at me with complete confidence. Welcome back, David's mom. I ran into John, so he invited me in. Somewhere along the line, Jessica had started addressing my husband by his name, and I had a deep-seated unease about it. Oh, we meet often, don't we? Isn't it a busy time for you at work? I asked with a hint of sarcasm. She was like, well, this is part of my job, with a smug face. What's part of the job? I felt like yelling at her for so boldly making herself at home. It's just that this house feels so cozy. It looks like you don't clean it thoroughly, like it has a homely feel, you know? I mean it in a good way. Jessica, subtly pointing out the deficiencies in my housekeeping, had a sly grin on her face. I'm sorry for the messy house. She's always been bad at housework. I wish she'd step up a bit more since she's always at home. My husband didn't rebut, but instead seemed to side with Jessica, chuckling along. Even though I work from home, I am somewhat self-conscious about not keeping up with housework. But if he'd be more proactive in helping with chores and childcare, it wouldn't be an issue. I couldn't understand why I was the only one being mocked and ridiculed. Unable to bear the tension in the room, I hastily left the living room for the bedroom, still holding my stuff. I was so frustrated, sad, and embarrassed. I feared that Jessica might eventually take over my place in the family. If she weren't associated with the basketball team my son goes to, I might have snapped back. But I worried about the repercussions for my son. Even after that, my husband and Jessica continued their dates, flaunting their relationship in front of me, who couldn't say a word. I'd hear from others that they often met outside, under the pretense of discussing my son's education. I decided to gather evidence during my husband's absences, and lo and behold, I found loads of evidence of his infidelity. Even though he always claimed we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or our anniversary, I found receipts from motels, fancy restaurants, and high-end brand watches and jewelry in his coat pocket. I even found receipts from places he told me we couldn't afford to go. It hurt to think he'd go with his mistress but not his wife. Still, I kept my composure and continued collecting evidence of his affairs. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, but I wanted to hang in there at least until David graduated from high school. However, I vowed to gather as much evidence as possible so that, if the time comes, I'd be in a favorable position. I wondered where all the money he was spending on his mistress came from. Even if he put in all of his salary, it would be hard to keep up this charade. As I wandered around the house deep in thought, I suddenly remembered something and went pale. In our house, there's an account where we've been saving up for my son's college fund. I had this overwhelming bad feeling, and cold sweat ran down my back. I quickly checked transactions of that account. What was recorded in the account was evidence of substantial amounts being withdrawn several times over the past few months. I had created this savings account specifically to secure my son's education funds just in case. I hadn't checked it in a while and was shocked to find that the balance had decreased significantly. I had meticulously managed our credit card usage and monthly bills, but I hadn't been able to check this savings account monthly. The realization hit me hard, and I began to tremble. I tried hard to steady my shaking hands. The money he spent on his affair came from the savings I had put aside for our son. I didn't even care who he was having an affair with anymore. What I couldn't forgive was the fact that he was using the money saved for our child's future for his own selfish needs. His betrayal against me as his wife pales in comparison to the betrayal against our own son. I swallowed my boiling anger and decided to continue acting like everything was normal. I didn't want our son, who's at such an impressionable age, to catch on. I chose to keep all the problems and worries to myself, trying not to burden our son, who has been studying so hard. But the stress took a toll on me, and I started making small mistakes in my household chores and at work. At work, even Mrs. Smith, a client I had known for years, noticed my worn-out state. "Jennifer, you seem off lately. Don't overdo it at work. If there's anything bothering you, please let me know anytime." "Thank you, Mrs. Smith." I felt pathetic for making her worry, but her words did offer some comfort. While I was struggling, my husband seemed to be having a blast with his mistress, more than ever. Without my interference, he seemed more relaxed. Sooner or later, our son, David, would inevitably face the problems surrounding our family. David noticed my downtrodden demeanor and silently approached to help fold the laundry. "I kinda know what's going on." "Huh?" He was like, "Do whatever you wanna do, Mom. You don't have to worry about me." He took the folded laundry to the dresser. He's not much of a talker, but his thoughtful actions warmed my heart. And it made me even angrier at the traitor who touched the money I had saved for our precious son. There needed to be some sort of retribution for the traitor. First, I wondered if I should reach out to that person who told me they'd always be there to support me. I clenched my fists tightly and swore vengeance on my husband and his mistress. One evening, my husband suddenly informed me he'd be away for almost a week due to work. He claimed it was for a training program in another state, but I doubted that's the truth. The restaurant chain he's worked for only operated within our state and didn't have any locations or offices outside. When he took the job, the very same husband boasted that one of its perks was not having to relocate out of state. When my son and I heard this story, we responded, but deep down, we were both highly critical of John. My son casually said to my husband. You know, I heard one of the staffs from my club gonna be off work for a week too. At this time of year? I don't know if she's going on a vacation, but that seems pretty unusual. I mean, it'd be tough to go on a week-long vacation unless you've got some cash. As we conversed in a nonchalant tone, my husband looked at us with a startled expression. Until then, he had been proudly talking about the intensity of the training he was going to attend, but he suddenly became silent and stared down. Glancing at him, I noticed he was anxiously looking at his smartphone. Ever since I became sure of my husband's infidelity, I've been keeping tabs on both him and Jessica. I even hired a private investigator, who informed me that Jessica, who's working at the basketball facility, is also taking a week off. I've known all along that my husband's business trip was just a cover for a romantic getaway. I could have caught him red-handed, but I had other plans. I've been planning something ever since I knew about my husband's intentions to travel with Jessica. Of course, I had no intention of proceeding without my son's consent, but now he was on board. On the day of their trip, I waved goodbye to my eager husband, and then my son and I began cleaning the house. Along with cleaning, with the help of some relatives who came over, we also started packing. Our plan was to move out while my husband was away and stay in somewhere else. Until we found a new home, we were gonna stay with some relatives for a bit. Upon hearing our situation, the relatives, angered by my husband's actions yet concerned for David, gladly offered us a room. Moreover, I ensured that my husband couldn't access our savings account by transferring all the remaining money to my personal account. While making preparations, I noticed my husband's belongings were left behind. I couldn't leave his stuff behind when vacating the house. After some thought, I decided to send his belongings to a particular place. After getting Mrs. Smith's consent, I handed over the boxes to the pickup service. Looking around the tidy house, my son and I shared a smile. A few days after we moved, I was startled by the sudden ringing of my phone while staying at my relative's place. Seeing the caller's name made me sigh involuntarily. Hello, Jennifer? Hey. What's up in the middle of the day? Actually, during my training, I ran out of money. Can you transfer a bit to my account? My husband, who called in a panic, was obviously lying and begging me for money. No wonder our savings account was empty. He couldn't withdraw any funds. He must have really been in a bind since he sounded much more desperate than usual. Was it because he didn't want to look bad in front of Jessica? I was utterly exasperated. When I declined, he almost sounded like he was about to cry. With a smirk, I was like, why don't you just use the account you always withdraw from? Isn't there still a lot left? After a moment of silence, he started yelling and was like, are you okay with me being broke? But I didn't indulge him. Instead, I goaded him further. Your training's gonna end soon anyway. You'll be fine even without money. Suddenly, in the background, the frantic voice of a woman could be heard. That's right, I had been waiting for this moment. Taken aback by Jessica's voice in the background, my husband hastily hung up. Now everything was in place. The next day, my son and I were headed to a specific location. A magnificent mansion with a well-maintained garden. Anyone could tell that the residents were wealthy. On cue, my son and I found my cheating husband and his mistress in a room. My terrified husband sat on the floor, apologizing to someone. That someone, with a stern look on her face, was Mrs. Smith, a longtime client of mine and currently the principal of a middle school. David, my son, goes to her school, and Mrs. Smith and I have built a close relationship over the years. We trust each other with our personal troubles. I'm really sorry for my husband's trouble. I should be the one apologizing. Because of my good-for-nothing daughter, all this happened. It's turned out Jessica, who was on a trip with my husband, was grilled by her parents for a package she received at home and had no choice but to return home immediately. Naturally, she told my husband, John, to come with her. Upon hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband started to shake in fear. Mrs. Smith had always been concerned about my deteriorating health after knowing about John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair and she found out that the mistress was her daughter, she was utterly devastated. But Mrs. Smith wanted to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. She deeply apologized me, pointing at the piles of boxes. She sternly reprimanded her daughter. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always wanting what isn't yours. Your father and sisters were dumbfounded when they saw these packages yesterday." "But Mom, it's a misunderstanding. And who would send so many packages to our house? Isn't this woman out of her mind? John, say something." Jessica said that, her voice shaking with tears, and tried to force John, who didn't say anything, to join her. However, I doubted John would come up with any decent excuse after I glared at him. Jessica, with a panicked look on her face, blurted out that she didn't know her mother worked with me. Jessica never wanted her strict mother to know about her affair with a married man. Mrs. Smith, being an educator, possesses a strict moral code and won't tolerate dishonest behavior. She probably wouldn't ever forgive her daughter's actions. However, I couldn't muster a shred of sympathy for Jessica. "I'm gonna insist on apologize from you. I'll make sure my daughter pays for her sin, even if it takes her whole life. I'll ensure she fulfills her responsibility." "You've got to be kidding me! Why is this happening to me?" Ignoring the hysterical Jessica, I quietly glared at my silent husband standing next to her. "Hey, don't you have something to say to me?" As I sent a sharp glance alongside David, for some reason, he started berating me. "Jessica is a wonderful person. She thinks about the children way more than you ever did. Jessica is domestic and doesn't act all high and mighty even though she earns more than me. You're a failure as a wife." "Really? We can divorce if you want, but let me live with our son. I plan on raising him with Jessica." After vehemently berating me, my husband took a satisfying breath. While I was thinking of a retort, David, who had been standing behind me, stepped forward. "She's not a regular staff there, just an internship at the club. And don't you ever try to get all chummy with me again. Always flirting with men, it's disgusting." Just as my son said, Jessica hadn't been officially hired there. My husband always believed she was passionate and experienced in the industry involving students' education or activities, which was just laughable. Well, it seemed they both had their secrets. Looking at the stunned Jessica, I decided to give her a piece of advice before I go. "Did you know that I pay for the rent, the living expenses, and even David's tuition fees? This man, John, has been working odd jobs for years. You think he's okay?" "Hey. That's..." John, with a face drained of color, tries to interject, but it was already too late. Jessica was so shocked by the revelation that she collapsed on the spot, motionless. From what I could tell, John had been acting as if he had plenty of money to spare. He must have been hiding the fact that I was the breadwinner of the family to save face. In Jessica's eyes, I seemed like a lazy bum who neither worked nor took care of household chores properly. Mrs. Smith was left devastated, facing the harsh reality presented to her by my husband and Jessica. After David and I happily came home, it seemed John was kicked out of Mrs. Smith's house, looking defeated with Jessica and a load of stuffs. Months have flown by since the move. On Mrs. Smith's advice, I decided to leave my divorce process to a competent lawyer. Thanks to having a professional handle things, all the complicated procedures went smoothly, and I've been relieved. I heard that the savings I had set aside for David's education could also be added to the claim as a child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her having an affair with a student's parent, and she seems to have been kicked out. Losing her job, Jessica sought help from her parents, but Mrs. Smith didn't seem willing to help. Cut off from all support from her family, I heard she's now lost and confused. Jessica, despising a man without money, spat out words of disdain and abandoned John. John, who has no stable income, keeps trying to reconcile in every way possible, but neither David nor I are gonna agree that. Mrs. Smith feels terribly guilty for her daughter ruining a family. I held the downcast principal's hand and was like, let's keep working together. I'm really grateful for the principal, thanks to whom I've got a new job. Work has been going smoothly, and life with just David and me is filled with hope.
The job you do, Mom, is really amazing. You're the mom I'm proud of.
Looking at a magazine featuring my illustrations, David smiled joyfully. Touched by David's casual words, I, who was working on my laptop, discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. I want to keep pursuing my career as an illustrator, but above all, I want to work even harder for my precious David. From today on, I'll be taking care of this little one. Thanks for everything up until now. My mother-in-law exclaimed this to me with a warm smile on her face. Out of the blue, she came over to our house, grinning as she hugged my daughter, Emily. Emily looked dumbfounded at first, but as she began to comprehend her grandmother's words, she tried to wriggle out of her embrace. After holding Emily tight, my mother-in-law flashed another bright smile and said, "You should just leave now. My name is Susan. I work in an office building in the city. I'm a working mom. The building I work in isn't huge, but it's bustling because it houses more than just our company. I always find myself chatting with women of my age group, so I have many friends in the building. I've been recognized for my work in the accounting department and lead a fulfilling life. When I get home, my husband Paul and our 11-year-old daughter Emily are there. Paul and I manage our busy schedules, sharing household chores and childcare responsibilities. He genuinely cherishes both Emily and me. However, our blissful days started to change little by little. Paul tends to impose his own likes and interests on Emily. At first, it was soccer. It's one thing if Emily wants to play, but it felt forceful when he'd only let her play soccer even though she'd rather play in the sandbox. Yet, as she grew older, Emily became a soccer-loving girl who could stand toe-to-toe with her male classmates. Of course, she dreams of making her mark as a female soccer player in the future. I've become one of her biggest fans. But, Paul's enthusiasm seemed to last only in the early days. Lately, he's all about swimming. Girls should definitely try swimming. Maybe synchronized swimming could be good? When Paul brought it up during dinner, Emily made a face, clearly perplexed.
But Dad, I love soccer. I find it more fun than swimming and I want to do it even more.
Soccer is cool, sure, but why would you, a girl, want to play a sport typically considered for boys? A palpable tension runs between the two of them. At times like these, I always struggle with when I should intervene. Emily has her own thoughts, so I'm torn whether it's right to interrupt and end the conversation. Emily talks back to her father.
Gender doesn't matter. Right now, soccer is fun and pursuing it is my dream.
You've been playing soccer so much, you've gotten quite toned. You're tanned and look like a boy. Don't women need to be slim to be attractive? If you were swimming, you wouldn't have to worry about tanning.
You!
Emily is taken aback by his condescending remarks. I immediately scold my husband.
How could you say that to our daughter? Her physique is proof of the hard training she's been doing.
Just because she's our only daughter. Even though she's training so hard, she's still a girl. What's gonna happen if she ends up being a muscular woman with a small chest? Isn't that sad?
Why can you say such horrible things?
Shocked, Emily falls silent. I yelled at my husband even louder than before, but he doesn't seem to realize he's being insensitive about female soccer players. Sure, the teams are co-ed now, but her competition is mostly men. Emily has her limits being a girl. There aren't any female-only soccer teams around here, so maybe it's time to consider something else. I'm not saying she should go pro in swimming. Isn't it normal for girls to have swimming lessons?
Enough!
Emily storms out, knocking her chair back and running to her room. In disbelief, I turn to my husband who angrily says, "We were in the middle of a conversation." That wasn't a discussion. It was just him imposing his views, completely disregarding Emily's dignity and dreams. Later, when he wasn't around, I checked on her and as expected, she told me with tearful eyes that she didn't want to talk to her father. The next morning, I suggested she either leave for school at a different time to avoid Paul, or if it's too tough, she can take the day off. I did my best to console her. From then on, every time Paul brought up swimming, Emily ignored him.
She thinks she's so special, ignoring me just because she's a girl. Even if she's going through her teenage years, it's a bit much.
My daughter just keeps shutting herself off from her father, who won't listen to her words. I strongly felt that we had to change this situation, so I told my husband multiple times.
The one who's going overboard is you. Why do you only push your own interests onto our daughter? Why do you need to badmouth soccer when you talk about the greatness of swimming? You're the one trying to rain on something she's passionate about. Please, just respect her feelings and thoughts.
But it seems like nothing's getting through to him. Instead, he snaps at me.
Now you're gonna tell me what to do? Who do you think is taking care of our daughter? Just because you're my wife doesn't mean you can boss me around. Tell her clearly to quit soccer.
My husband's habit of ordering me and our daughter around and saying things like just because you're a woman or just because you're my wife as if our gender gives him the right, stems from a specific reason. It's a boss of his. We also know him privately, and he's a very close friend. He has been to our house and, apparently, he had a lot to say behind our backs when he found out we both work. This boss seems friendly and easygoing on the surface, and my husband enjoyed his company because of his personality. However, as time went on, the boss's distorted views towards women became more apparent. He started to emphasize the differences between men and women, making more remarks that belittle women's capabilities. At first, my husband would just laugh it off, but gradually those words started to stick. The boss's belief that women have a domestic role, and it's greedy for them to work, started casting a shadow on my husband's heart. This shift in my husband's attitude created a huge rift in our relationship. Initially, he was pressuring me, who works outside the home, to quit my job and stay home. But he realized that with his income alone, it would be hard to maintain our current lifestyle. So, he stopped pushing me outright to quit, but he keeps on preaching about the greatness of being a stay-at-home mom. Yet, that wasn't enough. And eventually, his frustration turned towards our daughter. He probably sympathizes with his boss because he imposes his own tastes and beliefs. He doesn't think about Emily's opinions or her future at all. He just thinks that since Emily is a woman, it's natural for her to obey his commands. The only way to mend this strained relationship is to change him. But no matter what we say or how, nothing seems to get through to him. On top of that, all we get is an outdated response. Who does she think she is, a woman, challenging me? I was distressed, but I couldn't let Emily suffer any longer. I finally brought up the idea of divorce to Paul. I want to distance myself from you, for Emily's future, I said. But he was vehemently against it.
This is why women are so foolish. If you really had Emily's future in mind, you'd know it's a bad idea to divorce a breadwinner like me. With rising college expenses, do you really think you can support her all by yourself? You're just too dumb. I'll guide you properly, so just shut up and follow.
He said this with an angry expression. His words were filled with confidence, as if he believed he was completely in the right. I've reached my limit. Taking a deep breath, I faced him. Yes, our income will decrease and preparing for college will be hard. But above all, I can't leave Emily by your side any longer. You don't think about her future at all. You just want to control her, don't you? This is the prime time of her life, and it's unfair for her to be dominated by her father. That's why I think we should part ways. I don't expect Emily to become a professional athlete, nor do I think she absolutely can't make it. I just want to support my daughter in pursuing what she loves. And you, who disrespect our daughter's dignity, are nothing but harmful. I believe it's my duty to provide an environment where Emily can safely explore her potential.
Don't just casually bring up divorce. If you want to leave, then just go on your own.
You're telling me to leave? When did I say that? And how do you plan to live with Emily if I do? Gonna call your mom? Paul crossed his arms, remaining stubborn. But when I stood my ground, his expression quickly turned smug.
It's your fault for mentioning divorce. I should just call my mom now and let her discipline you.
Paul acted immediately. He called his mother, who lives nearby.
Hello, Mom? Look, I'm in a bit of a bind. Susan suddenly mentioned getting a divorce. I'm just as shocked. I hate to ask, but can you come over and set her straight? You're a woman, too. Dad must have set you straight before, right? So, you can do the same for Susan?
He said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Most of what he said was blaming me for being selfish. It's quite sickening to hear him talk to his mother in that way. Regardless, my mother-in-law replied, I'm on my way. And it turned out we'd be discussing the divorce.
Is Grandma coming?
However, since we were discussing this in the living room, Emily came out of her room. We didn't want her to hear us talk about the divorce, so we had told her to stay in her room. She must have sensed something was amiss. Soon, my mother-in-law arrived, and as she caught sight of Emily, she rushed over, pushing past us to hug the little girl tightly. Then she turned to Paul and me with an angry look.
I've heard everything, Emily, you've been through a lot.
Paul smirked, thinking he had the upper hand, and glanced at me smugly. From now on, I'll take care of Emily.
Susan, you can't take it anymore, can you? Just pack up your things and be out by tonight.
Upon hearing this, Paul burst out laughing. Pointing at me, he said,
See, even Mom agrees. If you apologize now, I might forgive you. How dare you, a wife, defy your husband like that? Say you're sorry.
At this, Emily jumped out of her grandmother's embrace. She ran past the adults and into her room. My mother-in-law tried to follow, but the door opened immediately. There stood Emily, with a backpack on, a glossy sports bag slung over her shoulder, and even a cute little green carry-on suitcase in tow. She approached me with a smile.
I'm ready to go. Grandma can take care of the rest. I don't want a creepy dad like him.
She then took my hand. Her sunburned skin made her seem more robust, just like Paul had mentioned. Yet, feeling the warmth of her still tender hand, I nearly shed a tear.
Let's get going, Mom.
The one who was shocked was Paul. I had mentioned leaving, but he probably hadn't anticipated Emily wanting to come with me. Moreover, he was surprised at the bags packed to the brim and how well prepared everything seemed. What are you talking about? Emily, you can stay in this house. What we don't need is a nagging mother, right? I'm gonna kick out her and Grandma will come in your place. I'm gonna take you to swimming lessons next time, so calm down, alright? The husband, even at this point, kept making selfish remarks. However, it seemed the daughter had decided to ignore Paul, turning her back on him completely. Suddenly, the mother-in-law interjected with a puzzled look. Swimming lessons? Not soccer? Before I could say anything, the daughter spoke up. Dad doesn't like seeing my training and getting a muscular body. He thinks I should get a nice figure, wear cute swimsuits, and have lots of pictures taken. He says girls feel happier when they're popular with boys. Creepy, right? Hearing this from the daughter, both the mother-in-law and I were in shock. The mother-in-law raised her voice.
Paul! What on earth are you telling our daughter? You're not looking at her in that way, are you?
Paul flinched and looked around nervously. It was clear that, even in situations like this, Paul was always on thin ice with his mother.
It's a misunderstanding. But come on, no one wants a girl who looks like a man, right? It's definitely better if she focuses on her looks, dresses to impress guys, and uses makeup. In the end, she's gonna support her husband at home, right?
Paul tried to defend himself. My mother-in-law sighed. What would your late father say if he heard this? Thinking my mother-in-law was on his side, Paul looked even more flustered. But it wasn't surprising. Almost all of Paul's derogatory comments about women, and the way he treated me and Emily, had been reported to his mother. But I had hesitated to tell her about his criticisms of Emily's physique. It would have been too painful for any mother to hear. Paul had long since lost his filter. He always spoke disrespectfully about women, even to his mother, and no amount of scolding had any effect. My mother-in-law, unlike Paul, was a strong, dependable person. Eventually, after several consultations, we divorced, and a plan was set for my mother-in-law to re-educate Paul.
I'm sorry, Emily, Susan. I'll take responsibility for raising this boy,
the mother-in-law said, clearly referring to her son, Paul. Thus, in a role reversal, Emily and I temporarily moved into his mother's house. True to her word, she moved into our home and began Paul's re-education. The divorce was finalized, and we were supposed to go back to our normal lives. Finding a new place and dividing assets might take time, but living as a married couple was out of the question. As soon as Emily put down her backpack at her grandmother's house, she burst into tears. I hugged her, feeling more than ever that I never wanted to see Paul again. Just a week later, while I was at work, I had an unexpected visitor. The visitor's name was Mr. Smith, a name that sounded familiar to me. When I confirmed his full name, it was unmistakably that of my husband's boss. The very man who had influenced Paul so much. I was shocked and wondered why such a person would come to my workplace, yet I headed to the lounge booth within the office building. We have limited space for guests at our company, and it was currently being used for meetings with other clients. When we run out, we often borrow common areas within the building. For major negotiations, we might rent out a separate meeting room. Most of our walk-in visitors are salespeople, so I asked him to wait in the lounge. But it wasn't just Mr. Smith there. Paul was there too. Apparently, they had both taken a detour from their field sales to visit me. We can't talk properly at home with my mother around. Figured you'd take us seriously at work, Paul said. It seemed my husband, knowing I had his mother on my side, brought his idolized boss. What he wanted to say was the same old line. You need to settle down and listen to me. Heads of households should have the final say, you know. Women are just an accessory to men. Dressing up nicely is a given. Thinking they can compete with men in sports or anything is presumptuous. Man, I'm far from perfect. Can't discipline my unruly wife or daughter. Mr. Smith, I really need your help. Looking at my husband laughing and acting smug, I was getting a headache. To make matters worse, he said he would never approve of Emily's soccer and assumed I might as well quit my not-so-important job. The issue was Mr. Smith, sitting next to him, grinning at my discomfort, backing up every word Paul said. There wasn't Paul's mother here to take my side. I was being interrupted at work and, grappling with how to handle them, their harsh words paralyzed me. I was holding back from snapping at them, fearing things might escalate to violence. I could feel my eyes burning with tears. I was just grateful Emily wasn't here to see this. I wouldn't want her to see her father with such a scornful expression. I was contemplating leaving without a word, when someone spoke to us. Isn't that Mr. Smith from AB Company's sales department? What are you guys up to? Both men turned around and, in unison, quickly stood up. An older gentleman was standing there. He was well-dressed and clearly held a position of authority. Beside him was a woman, perhaps his aide or secretary. From the disdainful look she gave Paul and Mr. Smith, it was clear she had heard their conversation. Mr. Miller, what brings you here? My office is on the 3rd floor. You guys usually visit the branch office's conference room for sales. I guess you might not be interested in knowing this, but it might be useful for you to remember whether you're visiting the branch or the headquarters. At the sound and content of the man's chilling voice, Paul and Mr. Smith were left speechless, their faces pale as ghosts. The man was a business owner on the 3rd floor of the office building. If he didn't have meetings or appointments, he'd be over here, and I've seen him a few times before. The CEO remembered me and had been secretly listening to the intense conversation between us in the lounge. It wasn't until his secretary mentioned it that he realized Mr. Smith was a sales rep from one of their partners. Heard she's your wife, huh? To act that way towards a woman and kids. Was that young sales guy with you, Mr. Smith? Hand over your business card now. The CEO then collected business cards from both of them, casting a disdainful look at the trembling pair. After all, they had been working in a conference room so grand one could mistake it for the CEO's office of a headquarters. I found out later that Paul's company had stirred up a massive commotion, like poking a hornet's nest. We'll have to reconsider our partnership with you.
Please, I beg of you. I was just disciplining my not-so-competent wife. We won't cause any trouble for your company. Forgot that most of our consumers are homemakers raising kids? Even if it's someone outside the company, being associated with someone of such beliefs would hurt our image. Just get out of here.
Paying no attention to me, my ex-husband and his boss kept apologizing. But even their desperate pleas reeked of misogyny, and the CEO remained stern. I wasn't in a position to defend them, so I just watched. Perhaps due to the commotion, various office workers were giving the two cold stares. Eventually, the two were chased out of the building like flies. Later on, the CEO did reduce and eventually cut off all business dealings with my ex-husband's company. Rumors also spread about their behavior, causing many clients to back out, and the company removed the two from their sales positions. They lost trust from clients and within their company, ending up in positions where they were given no significant tasks. As for me, since that incident, the CEO has personally introduced me to some top-notch divorce attorneys, and we've kept in touch. I was advancing with custody investigations with his support. Juggling work, matters concerning Emily, and all procedures were tough, but with legal support, I was able to handle things more calmly. However, one day, my ex-husband and Mr. Smith showed up at my workplace again.
Please get Mr. Miller for me, help me out.
They pleaded loudly. I didn't feel as intimidated by them as I used to. It wasn't that they had changed, but rather that I had grown capable of taking their words calmly. Whispers and murmurs of surprise emanated from my colleagues towards the two who waited outside. This is gonna cause problems for other companies too. Eventually, I had no choice but to call the police. When they arrived, my ex-husband, Paul, got aggressive and was taken away. Thankfully, no one got hurt, and while he wasn't arrested, the ostracization within the company intensified. Paul, once seen as a potential star in sales alongside Mr. Smith, couldn't bear the shame and chose to resign early. As for Smith, his attitude didn't change. In fact, his behavior worsened due to his dissatisfaction with how he was treated. He brazenly started to slack off at work, arguing it was the company's fault for not giving him work. Furthermore, his aggressive behavior and misogynistic comments increased, and it seems he eventually faced a lawsuit from female colleagues. Later on, through the grapevine, I heard Mr. Smith sought legal help. However, when a female attorney listened to his story, he spewed outrageous comments like,
"Get me a male attorney."
Or,
"How can a woman be an attorney? How much did you pay? Maybe you're paying with your body?"
Leading him to be banned from that law firm. I was transferred to a new branch of my company. Given that my ex-husband knew my whereabouts and being a single mother had its challenges, I was moved to a department that prioritized a more child-friendly work environment. I couldn't move too far because of Emily's school and soccer team. I didn't want to change her environment entirely. Fortunately, the new location was just a few subway stops away, so as long as I was careful, I wouldn't run into Paul. Working in this new environment was quite stimulating for me. I could ensure time at home to chat with Emily, feeling fulfilled in both my work and personal life. Emily still passionately played soccer every day. I'm so happy to fully support her dreams. I decided to occasionally meet with Paul's mother. We'd make a bit of a trip to enjoy a cup of coffee at a fancy cafe and chat. Emily seems to be back in good spirits, doesn't she?
Yes, she really is. She adapted to the new environment quickly. Leaving home seems to have been good for her. I should have made that decision sooner.
When I smiled and nodded, my mother-in-law took a moment and then talked to me about my ex-husband Paul's behavior. Paul had quit his job and apparently stayed home for a while, deeply depressed. During that time, Mr. Smith faced lawsuits from female colleagues at the company, and naturally they lost touch. He probably had other things on his mind. It seems that since putting some physical distance from Mr. Smith, Paul's perspective has been gradually changing. I was told that he's breaking away from the influence of Mr. Smith and slowly going back to how he used to be. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. While it seems we still need my mother-in-law to keep an eye on him for a bit, I do prefer the kinder Paul I once knew. It's uncertain when he might relapse, so I haven't let him see our daughter, Emily. Any exchanges are done through lawyers or Paul's mother, avoiding direct contact. I won't ever say you should remarry him. If he's truly remorseful, he'd feel too guilty to even ask for it. You've got Emily to consider too, you both should prioritize your own happiness. Paul's mother concluded with that. I had always known she was dependable, but with this matter, I realized how invaluable she really is. Regardless of my history with Paul, I want to have a good relationship with her as an individual. When I expressed this, she got teary-eyed but agreed shyly. We're planning to watch a soccer game together. Emily has been selected as a regular player among the seniors, so we're gonna cheer her on with all we've got. My first impression upon seeing my sister-in-law for the first time was that she was an extremely charming person with striking features.
Nice to meet you, my name is Catherine. I'm here to say.
But just when I thought I wanted to get along with her, that feeling quickly faded in the next moment. Who's this old lady? Is she my bro's wife's mom? The atmosphere became tense when my sister-in-law not only interrupted my greeting but also referred to me as an old lady. From this day, my hellish days began. My name is Catherine Johnson. I'm just an ordinary 30-year-old housewife. 4 years ago, I was a career woman, totally engrossed in my job. Not to brag, but I was quite popular at the office. I achieved many accomplishments and was admired by my subordinates, superiors, and clients alike. My husband, Bob, was one of them. Bob and I would often meet since we dealt with each other's companies. The start of our friendship was at a party with Bob's company when he initiated a conversation with me. It seems my reputation had reached Bob's company too. According to Bob, he wanted to see for himself if the rumors about me were true, so he decided to join the business meeting with me. At first, he was skeptical, but as we worked together, he fell in love with my strong core and way of life. He felt that I was the only one for him. When I heard that he was determined to make me fall for him, I thought it was cute, like something a high schooler would do. As for me, I had been smitten from the very beginning. You see, Bob had such striking features and was incredibly popular among women. Embarrassingly, Bob was just my type, so I had a secret crush on him. We were business partners, so I kept a certain distance. However, after Bob asked me out on numerous dates, we dated for a year and then got married. Our married life was smooth, and every day was blissful. Every morning, while I was preparing breakfast, Bob would wake up. With a gentle look on his face, he'd say, "Good morning," and give me a warm hug. It became our daily routine. Despite being older, his childlike behavior always tickled my maternal instincts. Furthermore, Bob and I have never had an argument. And why would we? Bob never gets mad. When I accidentally broke a plate he cherished, he was more concerned about me than the plate. I always think about how kind he truly is. Both of us wanted a child, so after getting married, I decided to quit my job to focus on starting a family. Any child of Bob and me is bound to be adorable. I constantly thought about names, especially if it was a girl. Time flew by, and this year marks our 3rd anniversary. We haven't been blessed with a child, but we were still happy. Except for one thing. Bob's family home housed his mother and younger sister. His father passed away from cancer before we got married. His mother is always cheerful and has been very kind to me. I believe Bob's kindness comes from his mother. However, his sister was different. I really didn't like her. Thinking back, it started from the time I first introduced myself before we got married. My first impression of her was that she was a very charming person with striking features, just like Bob. I had briefly thought I wanted to get along with her, but that feeling vanished in the next instant.
Nice to meet you, my name is Catherine. I'm here to say.
Who's this old lady? Is she my bro's wife's mom? Not only did she cut off my greeting, but the atmosphere went cold in an instant when my sister-in-law called me an old lady. My sister-in-law didn't greet me back, so Bob stepped in to introduce me. With a sarcastic tone and looking directly at me, she feigned surprise and asked, "How old are you?" I replied, 27.
No way, seriously? That's hilarious. I thought you were like 50. You really look old.
That was way out of line. I genuinely doubted if this girl was Bob's sister. She blatantly stared at me from head to toe, sizing me up. I just watched her in silence until she furrowed her brow. Whether she disliked my face or my attitude, I couldn't tell, but she kept making snide remarks about my appearance. "Your clothes are so out of style, you're overweight, your nails are unkempt." And more. After a while, I just stared down at my own feet. Bob's hands trembled with rage, while his sister laughed continuously. Then, Bob snapped. Something he rarely does.
"Hey, what the hell are you saying? That's extremely rude."
She responded with, "Ugh, what? You're so annoying." Totally killed the mood. She's just plain nasty. And she would make these same types of snide comments to Bob and their mother. They had put up with her behavior for years without expecting any change in her attitude. Both Bob and his mother apologized to me later. They weren't at fault, so why were they apologizing? I felt sorry for them, but at the same time, I harbored anger towards the sister-in-law for making such remarks to her own family. To minimize contact, I decided not to visit Bob's family home anymore. I heard about the sister-in-law through their mother, but she never caused any harm to us, so I went on living my life peacefully. Then, one day, an incident shattered my happy daily life.
"Catherine, Bob, I have a favor to ask. I'm planning to move to a senior housing facility with assistance in 6 months. Can I stay with you until then?"
Bob's mother had injured her back. No surprise there. It's clear that the sister-in-law is to blame. Their mother already had a frail back and had trouble even carrying groceries. Yet, the sister-in-law who lived with her wouldn't lift a finger to help and would even make her mother carry her shopping bags. That's the level of her selfishness. It's inevitable that the mother's health would deteriorate. I just can't understand why the mother doesn't just kick her out of the house. Is it because she's her daughter? Maybe, no matter how bad the child is, a mother's love knows no bounds. I'm all for living with the mother. But that's only if it's just her. If we live with her, it means the sister-in-law comes with the package. Accepting it was the last thing I wanted. But, I was concerned about the mother's health, so I felt I had no choice but to accept the sister-in-law moving in too. Just as I had expected, living together was hell. From morning to night, the sister-in-law would only spew venom. Especially at me. When I cooked, she'd comment, "This tastes so bad. How can you even make such trash? You're weirdly talented." And then she'd ruthlessly throw the food in the trash. Whenever I folded her clothes, she would always find something to complain about. Sometimes she'd even say things like,
"You need to iron this properly."
Her attitude was like a rebellious teenager. In fact, she never even mentioned anything about how I folded clothes or ironed them. The sister-in-law has a habit of twisting words to fit her narrative. When cleaning the room, I have to be thorough, especially in the corners. Otherwise, the sharp-tongued comments from my sister-in-law start.
"Hey! There's still dust over there. You know, you're pretty much the maid here, so do it right. You're so useless."
Even though my sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger, she's quick to point out any flaws. I silently wonder when I'll escape this hell. As I continued cleaning, she added,
"Poor Bob. You can't even manage household chores, so the least you can do is have a child. I wonder why you were even born a woman." Excuse me? What's your problem?
I couldn't let that comment slide. I'd always held my tongue, but this was too much. But I didn't say anything more. Or rather, I couldn't. The look on my sister-in-law's face was terrifying, as if she was looking at something filthy. The pressure was so intense I couldn't help but look down. It was frightening. It was infuriating. All these feelings were swirling inside me, and all I could do was hold back the tears. Then my sister-in-law left the room, laughing smugly. One day, my sister-in-law came home in a great mood. When my mother-in-law asked why, my sister-in-law eagerly began to brag. Apparently, her boyfriend had proposed. She boasted that he's tall, handsome, and earns a high income. She immediately approached me and brought up my inability to have children.
While I'm on top of the world, losers like you should fulfill their roles as women by having kids.
She laughed at me with that familiar, mocking tone. It was shocking. She didn't have to say that in front of Bob and my mother-in-law. Bob got angry at my sister-in-law's comments, but she wouldn't listen. Suddenly, I felt nauseous. With tears in my eyes, I rushed to the bathroom. From behind, I heard her say, "Pathetic." But I felt so sick that I didn't care. From the living room, I could hear Bob and my sister-in-law arguing. My mother-in-law was beside me, patting my back, and said,
"Children are a blessing. It's up to you and Bob to decide the pace."
She comforted me with tears in her eyes. I wished from the bottom of my heart that my sister-in-law would get married and leave as soon as possible. On another day, after a routine visit to the OB/GYN, I decided to take a detour on my way home. There was a popular flower shop nearby that was always bustling. I was thinking about buying some flowers when an old colleague, Steve, called out to me. Even though I've left my old job, Steve still looks up to me. We occasionally chat on text, discussing work matters. It's been 3 years since we last met. We chatted for a bit, and he told me he's gonna marry his girlfriend soon. They have a date planned later that day. I was curious about why Steve was at the flower shop, but it soon became clear. Seeing Steve talk so happily about his girlfriend made me smile too. Realizing it was time to go, Steve picked out his flowers and went to pay. While waiting, I browsed the flowers, deciding which to buy. When Steve returned, he had 2 bouquets in his hands. He handed one to me as a gift.
"This is for you. It's baby's breath. The flower's meaning is gratitude and happiness. I've always been grateful for you, Catherine. Please continue to be there for me."
Saying that, Steve headed toward the train station. Gratitude and happiness, huh? Never having chosen flowers based on their meaning, I thought Steve was a warm-hearted person. I hurried home. I wanted to tell my husband about today's events as soon as possible. When I got home, my sister-in-law wasn't there. It seems she had gone out. I placed the baby's breath in a vase and prepared dinner with my mother-in-law. It felt peaceful and joyful to have some time just the 3 of us after so long. With my sister-in-law gone, my mother-in-law was watching her favorite TV show that starts every day at 7 p.m. That night, I told my husband about the day's happenings, and we both went to bed with smiles on our faces. The next day, my sister-in-law came home in the morning. She had a bouquet of roses in her hand, which she suddenly threw at me. She said, "Put these in a vase," and then went to her room. I tried to put the thrown bouquet into a vase, but most of the flowers were broken or the petals were torn, so they ended up in the trash. I wondered how roughly she had handled them. I began to feel sorry for my sister-in-law's boyfriend. On closer inspection, I recognized the wrapping of the bouquet. After changing into her house clothes, my sister-in-law started talking again.
"Hey, I'm bringing my boyfriend over this Saturday. Make sure you dress decently, okay? Honestly, I wouldn't even want him to see you in your usual tacky outfits."
Her words irked me, but the thought that my time with her would be short brought some relief. On the appointed day, Bob and I were out shopping because my sister-in-law had asked us to. My mother-in-law texted to say that my sister-in-law's fiancé had arrived in our absence. She probably didn't want me meeting her fiancé. When we returned, the living room was bustling. When I went to greet them, my sister-in-law glaringly looked at me. I accidentally made eye contact with the fiancé. After a brief mutual gaze, my sister-in-law, seemingly disliking it, said,
"Don't just stand there. The tea's gotten cold, go get a fresh one."
Her fiancé tried to help, but she stopped him. My mother-in-law mentioned the beautiful roses and baby's breath in the vase, to which my sister-in-law made a snide remark.
"Why is your flower and the one I got from my boyfriend in the same vase? It's awful. Separate them or throw them out. Your flower is colorless and not cute at all."
She took the baby's breath from the vase and dropped it onto the floor. As I served the refreshed tea and placed the baby's breath in another vase, my sister-in-law's taunts continued. Apparently annoyed by my silence, she deliberately spilled the tea I had poured, staining the floor. The floor we had just cleaned with my mother-in-law that morning was now stained brown. From my viewpoint, I could see my sister-in-law's nervous fidgeting. She looked quite agitated. Bob brought a cloth and helped me wipe the floor.
"Bob, you don't have to get dirty for her. Come on, let's sit and chat."
The atmosphere was tense. Did my sister-in-law not realize that her words were backfiring on her? Her fiancé, who had been observing the situation, tried to defend me with his words. But, of course, my sister-in-law wasn't having any of it.
"Why are you defending her? You should only be looking at me,"
she exclaimed, past the point of no return.
"Isn't she your sister?"
her fiancé asked, seeking clarification. In response, my sister-in-law uttered her usual demeaning phrase.
"Nah, she's just the maid here. So it's okay."
My mother-in-law tried to silence my sister-in-law, but as expected, it was to no avail. She just went on and on with her usual nasty comments. Once she was done ranting with a satisfied look on her face, her fiancé looked straight at her and said something.
"Let's break up."
"What?" Steve was livid. No wonder, after all, he was the Steve. I kind of guessed that my sister-in-law was engaged to Steve. The bouquet of roses my sister-in-law brought home was the same one Steve had bought just the other day.
"Catherine is a senior colleague at my workplace, someone I respect and who's kinder than anyone else. And about that baby's breath flower you said wasn't cute, I sent it to Catherine. Sorry for my bad taste." "Wait a minute, I had no idea you two worked together."
My gleeful sister-in-law began to panic.
"Just because you didn't know, you think you can mock him? I've always heard about you being so mean, but Catherine isn't like that."
Steve's gaze was cold. My mother-in-law looked down, while my husband stood by my side, glaring at my sister-in-law. Everyone in the room looked utterly disappointed in my sister-in-law. Seeing this, my sister-in-law looked at me with wide eyes, begging for support.
"This isn't a joke, right? Tell me it's not."
She pulled on my collar so hard it stretched my shirt. I firmly shook off my sister-in-law's hand.
"I've always put up with your snide remarks. After all you've done, don't come to me for help now."
For the first time, I laid bare my emotions towards my sister-in-law.
"You've got to be kidding me. You can't do anything right. You can't even have kids, you're finished as a woman."
As my sister-in-law tried to slap me, Bob stepped in and grabbed her hand. Bob, who had remained silent till now, grabbed a cup of tea and poured it over my sister-in-law's head in anger. He then shouted at her in a low, booming voice. Bob began to recount the truth about our struggles to conceive. It wasn't me who couldn't have children, it was Bob himself. Bob had male infertility. After diligent treatment, it was cured. And now, I was carrying our baby. Furious at my sister-in-law's comment, Bob shouted at her to apologize immediately. Seeing her brother truly angry for the first time, my sister-in-law was so startled she fell on her butt.
"What's going on? Mom, you're on my side, right?"
My sister-in-law tightly grasped my mother-in-law's hand, clinging to her leg in a comical manner. But she was shrugged off.
I'm done with you. I've let a lot slide because you're my daughter, but I've reached my limit. Leave this house now. You're the worst daughter. You ungrateful brat.
My sister-in-law, thinking her mother was her last ally, was abandoned by even her. Clearly, even she was taken aback by this. She ran to her room, crying. Steve said he would contact us later and left the house. My mother-in-law hugged me and said, "You endured so much, you did well," while patting my head. My mother-in-law, hearing for the first time that I was pregnant, cried with a smile saying,
"Why didn't you tell me sooner? Congratulations."
Bob apologized for not protecting me properly. It was a tumultuous few minutes, but I felt refreshed having finally expressed my feelings to my sister-in-law. I'll never forget what happened today. Later, my mother-in-law moved to a senior living community, and the family home was sold. Bob and I decided to move closer to my mother-in-law. We wanted her to watch our child grow up. I haven't heard anything about my sister-in-law since. After that, Bob dragged his reclusive sister out of the room and forcefully threw her out of the house, belongings and all. No one has been in touch with the sister-in-law, so nobody knows where she is or what she's up to. I got a message from Steve via text that he had sent a letter and some flowers. A bouquet of baby's breath had just arrived in the mail. I put the bouquet of baby's breath into a vase and started reading the letter.
"Catherine, I'm so sorry for my late response. How have you been feeling? Congratulations on your pregnancy. It was such unexpected happy news that it even made me happy."
The letter went on to discuss his relationship with the sister-in-law after that incident. It seems that Steve and the sister-in-law had met once after the event. This was because it later came to light that the sister-in-law had been two-timing. Steve found out when the other man she was seeing contacted him. Since then, he's cut ties and they're no longer in touch. If they had gotten married, he would have surely regretted it. The letter was filled with his gratitude. I should be the one thanking Steve, but he really is a sincere young man. I truly hope he finds happiness. The end of my sister-in-law, who bullied me relentlessly, was unexpected. Through these events, I realized how one's actions, good or bad, come back to oneself based on how you treat others. I hope my child will be filled with compassion and understanding.
I once almost died, but I was able to recover and I feel like I've been reborn. I'm ready to start my life over, but I can't be bothered to take care of an old woman.
Although my husband was able to recover from his illness because I became a donor, he never expressed any gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer. Although I felt frustrated and anxious, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, he had been out and about, which had already made me suspicious. And now, I am the one who is sick. I have been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, it is not advanced, but I will have to start treatment with surgery and chemotherapy. I am filled with anxiety and I can't believe he is abandoning me like this. All my love and trust for my husband has vanished in an instant. The hardest part is that, for our daughter, Kate, he is undoubtedly her only father. I feel guilty about her becoming fatherless, but with my upcoming battle against the disease, I don't have the energy to try to repair our relationship. A month later, I received a series of aggressive calls from my husband, which I ignored. Eventually, he showed up at my hospital room and dropped a bombshell. My name is Christy Young, a 29-year-old housewife. I have been married to Mike, who is a year older than me, for 7 years, and we have a lovely 5-year-old daughter, Kate. I used to work full-time as a regular employee even after we got married, but I quit when I went on maternity leave. I really wanted to take it slow and raise Kate, but due to the economic downturn, we couldn't afford to live on my husband's salary alone. So, as soon as Kate was able to go to daycare, I started working again. I got a job at an apparel company where my sister-in-law, Lisa, is the president. They were looking for an office worker, and since I had similar experience from my previous job, they hired me right away. Although I am a relative, I was not pampered, but the atmosphere in the office was good, and there were many senior mothers, so it was easy to consult about childcare and take leaves for sudden fevers of my child. I am really grateful that I was introduced to such a good workplace. However, it was extremely tough to juggle work, housework, and childcare. In the morning, I prepared breakfast for my husband and Kate, made my husband's lunchbox, sent him off, took Kate to daycare, and went to work. After work, I picked up Kate, went shopping, came home, cleaned, bathed Kate, and prepared dinner. By the time I finished preparing Kate's meal, my husband came home, so I prepared his dinner, and while he was eating, I put Kate to bed. Although my days were hectic, my husband was not very cooperative with housework or childcare. Even if Kate had a fever in the morning and I was busy taking care of her, he would still say, "Where's my breakfast?" without any concern. When I asked him to do the grocery shopping because I had to work late, he complained, "I am tired from work." I was tired from work too, but I didn't have the energy to argue, so I ended up doing everything by myself. Our lives took a sudden turn. When my husband was advised to have a detailed examination after his company health check showed some bad results. My husband didn't want to get retested because he said he didn't feel any pain and was fine, but he started to feel a little uncomfortable in his daily life, with unexplained bruises all over his body, bleeding gums just from brushing his teeth. It would be terrible if he ignored it and it turned out to be a serious illness. We have to think about Kate's future, so I asked him to get a thorough checkup, and it turned out he had leukemia.
Why me?
He was shocked to hear a familiar disease name. However, leukemia is not incurable nowadays. There are many cases of remission and social reintegration through chemotherapy and bone marrow transplantation. I decided to support my husband, who was on the verge of despair and self-destruction, and accompany him through the treatment. He took a leave of absence from work and was admitted to the hospital immediately. As for me, I had to manage work, housework, childcare, and supporting my husband's treatment. I reached my limit before my husband did. The stress of hospitalization made him lash out at me more than before, which was one of the reasons. I knew it was misplaced anger, but I was honestly exhausted from going to work, taking care of Kate, doing housework, and visiting the hospital in my spare time. That's when Lisa, my sister-in-law, reached out to me. "Why don't you live with me? I can help with the housework and taking care of Kate." She was the president of a company, and I knew from working at the same place that she was always on the front lines of sales. She made a point of picking up feedback from the field rather than leaving everything to her subordinates, which made it easier for the staff to exchange opinions. So, I knew how busy she was. "I really can't impose on you. You're busy too. If you collapse now, Kate will be the one who suffers the most, right? I will support Mike as much as I can. You should rely on those who can help you now," Lisa said firmly, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I was worried about Mike, Kate's future, and my own health. I was really grateful for Lisa's presence, and her encouraging words saved me. Mike's parents had already passed away, and Lisa was living alone in her parents' house. I've always thought it was too big for one person. I didn't want to sell it because it has memories of my parents, but I'm glad you two can come. She warmly welcomed me and Kate. Living with Lisa was very comfortable. We had always gotten along well, and it felt like I had gained a real sister. Lisa, who had been living alone for a long time, was good at housework. She actively helped out, which made my life much easier than before. At that time, there was hope for my husband's treatment. I was found to be a compatible donor for his bone marrow transplant. As soon as Mike was diagnosed with leukemia, Lisa and I underwent testing to be bone marrow donors. The probability of finding a compatible donor is 1 in 4 among siblings, and it is said to be 1 in several hundred to several tens of thousands among unrelated people. We were devastated when we heard that Lisa's bone marrow was not compatible, but when we found out that I could be a donor for Mike, he was overjoyed. To provide bone marrow as a donor, I had to be hospitalized for several days. During that time, I had to take time off work and couldn't take care of Kate. It was a burden on Lisa, but she didn't show any signs of annoyance.
Thank you so much for doing this for my brother. I will do everything I can to support you, so don't worry about anything. Just take care of yourself now. Encouraged by Lisa, I underwent bone marrow extraction surgery for my husband. After the surgery, Mike had to spend some time in a sterile room, being careful of infections while resting. I was discharged from the hospital after a few days and, thanks to my sister-in-law's kindness, took an additional 2 or 3 days off work before returning. The hematopoietic stem cells transplanted into Mike seemed to be working properly, and after a few weeks, he was able to move to a general ward. When I took our daughter, Kate, to visit Mike in the general ward, there was a nurse in the room. Seeing Kate after a long time, Mike smiled happily. Mr. Young is recovering well. He is still young and strong, so if he continues to make good progress, I think he can return to work soon. Thank you very much, as always. The nurse smiled and left the room. As she said, Mike's condition stabilized, and he was able to be discharged a few months later. Although he still needed to rest at home, the 4 of us, including Lisa, started living together in the in-laws' house. I had to take on all the responsibilities of work, housework, childcare, and taking care of Mike again, but it was less burdensome thanks to Lisa living with us. Moreover, Lisa is the type of person who can speak her mind clearly to Mike. You don't have to push yourself too hard, but you should practice doing some housework as part of your rehabilitation. Hearing this, Mike reluctantly started helping with the chores. However, since he was still recovering, I often ended up helping him, and eventually, he stopped doing even the things he could do, knowing that I would come to help if he dawdled. I still feel sluggish. Using that as an excuse, he wouldn't even try to get up from the sofa. When the doorbell rang while I was preparing dinner, and I asked him to answer it because I couldn't leave what I was doing, he sighed heavily and complained. They told me to rest, and you're being demanding. I couldn't help but think that it was not too much to ask, but only Mike knew the extent of his pain. So, I believed him and made an effort to move myself, even if it was a bit of a strain. Perhaps because I overexerted myself again, my health started to deteriorate. It became harder to eat, and Lisa started worrying that I might have lost weight. By this time, Mike had almost fully recovered and had returned to work. Even though I no longer had to take care of Mike, the household chores and childcare didn't decrease. Even when I was not feeling well, Mike, who had regained his energy, started going out alone more often on his days off. He didn't seem to notice that I was unwell and didn't offer to help with the chores. When I asked him where he was going and with whom, he got angry and said, "I have a private life too." Eventually, the stress caused my stomach to ache continuously, and Lisa suggested I get a full medical checkup. Since Mike had been seriously ill, I thought it would be better to address any issues early for Kate's sake. As a result, this time I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, the progression seemed to be slow, but still, hospitalization and painful chemotherapy were necessary. At the sudden news of my hospitalization, Kate seemed anxious, but her father was out for the day, and he couldn't comfort her. Instead, my sister-in-law, Lisa, stayed with Kate. To avoid disturbing me while I prepared for the hospital, Lisa took Kate out shopping. While I was silently preparing, my husband, Mike, came home. What's going on? Are you going on a trip or something? I yelled at Mike's carefree demeanor. I have stomach cancer. Stomach cancer. I've been feeling sick lately, so I went for a checkup today. That's the diagnosis. I need to be hospitalized. Hospitalized. What about the house during that time? Are you leaving it to my sister? I was shocked that the first thing he worried about after hearing about my hospitalization was not concern for me. Granted, it's not a matter of life and death because the progression is slow. But still, facing his wife who is about to undergo painful chemotherapy, the first thing he asks about is the house, which I found utterly disappointing. Well, this is just perfect. Huh? Divorce me. What? I was confused and bewildered by the sudden request. I had always supported him devotedly when he was ill. Now that I'm the one who's ill, he turns his back on me. Having nearly died once and being able to recover, I feel reborn. I want to start over, and I don't want to take care of an old woman.
Despite my being the donor that allowed Mike to recover, not once did he express gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer.
You don't even wear makeup at home. I can't see you as a woman anymore. Even if you say that, I'm busy with work, housework, and childcare. I don't have time for makeup. That's just an excuse. On top of that, you have cancer now. I can't deal with that.
I was bewildered by Mike's angry demands to sign the papers quickly. I was already anxious about the cancer diagnosis. However, despite my frustration and anxiety, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, Mike had been out and about, and I had been feeling suspicious since then. With this illness, all my love and trust for him vanished. What pained me was that for Kate, he was undeniably her only father. I felt guilty about making her a child of a single parent, but with the battle against cancer ahead, I didn't have the energy to repair my relationship with Mike.
Humph.
Now we are just strangers. Mike smiled satisfactorily.
Hey, is it over?
Don't just come in like that.
But you're taking too long.
Suddenly, an unfamiliar young woman appeared at the entrance. She wore flashy makeup and was dressed in a stylish dress, a beautiful woman. But on closer inspection, her face was familiar.
Are you the nurse from the hospital where Mike was admitted?
It was hard to tell at first glance because she was in plain clothes, but she was the nurse assigned to my husband's room at some point. Apparently, she seems to have been his mistress.
Yes, she is.
She supported me devotedly when I was sick.
Much more than you ever did.
I was dumbfounded by Mike's boastful statement. Supporting a patient devotedly is a fundamental part of a nurse's job. It's frustrating to be compared to her in that regard.
Get out of this house right now. This is my family home, after all.
And then he said that assertively. Indeed, this is my husband's family home, but it is now under the name of my sister-in-law, Lisa. However, if I divorce Mike, Lisa and I will become strangers. More than parting with Mike, it's sad to be separated from Lisa, who is kind, reliable, and has a good relationship with my daughter, Kate. But there's nothing I can do about it. I packed my suitcase with just the essentials, in addition to preparing for my hospitalization. I no longer have any love for my husband, and I want to get out of this situation as soon as possible. While I was silently preparing, Lisa and Kate, who had gone shopping, came back.
We're home. Oh, do we have a guest?
Lisa seemed surprised to see an unfamiliar woman, and Kate, clinging to Lisa, seemed to not understand the situation. So, I clearly stated, I am going to divorce Mike.
What?
Lisa looked as shocked as I felt. Then, as if realizing something, she handed Kate some snacks she had just bought and told her to eat them in the next room. With only adults left, Lisa immediately glared at my husband.
What are you thinking?
Mike recoiled for a moment when Lisa, not me, confronted him.
He's going to divorce me and start a new life with that woman over there. Since you and I will become strangers, he told me to leave.
Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief at my words.
Christy is having a tough time, and you? How selfish can you be? You're the one who should leave. Never show your face to me again.
Lisa firmly told off Mike, who clicked his tongue, snorted, and left the house. The woman glanced down at me, smirked triumphantly, and followed Mike.
Christy, I'm really sorry.
After the two left, Lisa looked at me apologetically. I felt guilty for making her, who had done nothing wrong, feel that way.
Please don't make that face. You've done so much for me, Lisa, and I can't thank you enough.
And I felt a bit relieved that Lisa had decisively cut off Mike. Even if you divorce Mike, I'll always be on your side, Christy. We had already vacated the house we lived in before Mike fell ill. Having been kicked out by Lisa, Mike now had no place to live, but he probably planned to move in with that woman. Although he had insurance and subsidies, Mike shouldn't have much savings left after his major illness. Well, it's none of my business anymore since we'll be strangers. Although we were no longer a married couple, Lisa is still helping me. I have to be hospitalized, and I was thinking of leaving Kate with my parents, but I was wondering what to do about transferring her kindergarten when Lisa said, "I'll take care of her." I know Kate will be anxious without her mom, and changing environments will make her even more anxious. My work is stable right now, Lisa said, so I decided to rely on her. About a month after I was hospitalized, I received a call on my smartphone. The name displayed was my ex-husband, Mike, and of course, I ignored the call. Despite ignoring it repeatedly, I kept getting calls from Mike. When I mentioned this to Lisa, who came to visit me, she said she also received calls and ignored them, but he apparently showed up at her in-laws' house. He apparently insisted on seeing me, but she sent him away, saying it was impossible since I was in the hospital. Don't pay attention if he says anything. It's too late for him to realize your worth now. Lisa's words made me feel stronger. After saying goodbye to Lisa, saying, "I am going home for today," Mike appeared in my hospital room.
Why are you here?
I hadn't told Mike which hospital I was admitted to. He didn't even ask.
I went to my parents' house today. I saw my sister leaving with flowers, so I thought she might be visiting you.
Apparently, he followed Lisa. Mike's persistence was terrifying, and I was puzzled about what he wanted. Then, he clung to me. My illness has recurred. It turns out, Mike's leukemia had recurred. Although remission is possible with a bone marrow transplant, it does not guarantee there will be no recurrence. So, can you be a donor again? I was dumbfounded by his audacity. I was battling a severe illness, cancer, and the ex-husband who abandoned me came back as soon as he fell ill again. It was all too convenient.
I don't care. Isn't it your own fault?
What do you mean?
Didn't you have someone who supported you more devotedly than I did?
Upon hearing my words, Mike looked regretful. It seems that as soon as she found out about Mike's recurrence, his girlfriend immediately broke up with him. She apparently said she could handle work but not taking care of a sick person in her personal life. You're the only one I can rely on now, I firmly told Mike, who was begging for my help.
I absolutely don't want to. Are you going to abandon me when I am sick? You were the one who abandoned me first, right?
Mike was at a loss for words at my response.
Besides, I am currently consulting a lawyer about you.
A lawyer?
Yes, of course.
Child support for Kate.
I will make sure you pay.
But I am sick.
I am telling you, I am too.
As our fruitless argument continued, a doctor who noticed the commotion came into the room. The doctor restrained Mike, who was trying to grab me, and took him away. It seems that Mike was later handed over to the police. After being interrogated, a restraining order was issued against him. Hearing the commotion, Lisa came back to my room. After hearing the details, she seemed utterly disgusted by Mike's selfishness. I asked Lisa to testify, and after consulting with my lawyer, I decided to claim compensation from Mike and his mistress. Mike was very reluctant, but his mistress agreed to pay immediately, as if it were a severance payment. Since then, I have been slowly recovering. Lisa has been supporting me devotedly, and although Kate is still young, she has been cheering me on without being selfish. The cancer was successfully removed, and no metastasis has been found. On one hand, Mike still hasn't found a donor and is apparently living in fear every day. He managed to pay me the compensation by depleting his savings, but it seems that he won't be able to afford Kate's child support. Since he can't pay child support, he is not allowed to visit, so he is seemingly fighting his illness alone. I still have a good relationship with Lisa. After I was discharged from the hospital, I thought I couldn't bother her anymore, so I was considering moving out with Kate, but she got mad at me, saying I shouldn't think about unnecessary things after recovering from an illness. She told me to spend freely until I saved enough money, and I took advantage of her kindness and lived with her for a while with 3 of us. Since Kate is very attached to Lisa, we eventually decided to rent an apartment nearby even after saving enough money. We go back and forth between each other's houses, and now we have a relationship like best friends. I had a terrible breakup with Mike, and I was struck by an illness and had a hard time, but there are still people like Lisa who have supported me without changing. I may make Kate feel lonely, but I hope she grows up to be a strong, kind, and just woman like Lisa, and I want to continue to get along well in the future.
We don't need the old lady. You can deal with the deadweight,
Alicia, my sister-in-law, said with a smug smile. She probably doesn't care about Grandma as long as she gets the house. My brother also grinned, looking at Grandma and me. This isn't a place where Grandma can live her final days happily. That's why I declared, "It's okay, I'll be with Grandma. My name is Amy Smith. I turned 50 this year. Currently, I live with my husband. We have 2 kids, but they moved out long ago after becoming adults. There were tough times juggling work and parenting when the kids were little, but looking back, it feels surprisingly short-lived. What fills the emptiness in my heart are my job, my husband, and Grandma. Currently, I work with my husband at a high-end restaurant. I run the place, while my husband, Jake, is the head chef. The reason I'm the owner is that I majored in business management in college and was interested in the restaurant business. At first, I wanted to provide my own dishes, but I quickly gave up. Seems like I didn't have a knack for cooking. Back in college, a posh hotel nearby was hiring kitchen helpers. Luckily, I got the job. But apparently, even as a part-timer, my cooking skills didn't meet professional standards. My knife skills were so bad that they quickly moved me to serving. Even if it was a lowly position, I wanted to gain some experience in the culinary world. It was my first setback. I ran straight to Grandma for comfort. After comforting me for a bit, Grandma looked me in the eyes and said, "Amy, I know you have dreams. But there isn't just one path. Some might be detours, but no road is useless. So, keep your chin up and give it a shot." Encouraged by Grandma's strong words, I replied,
"Thanks, Grandma. I'm gonna give it my best shot."
Thanks to Grandma's words, I managed to keep going and continued my serving job throughout college. Grandma was always kind and always stood by my side. For someone like me, who lost both parents, she's the most dependable figure in my life. And then I met Jake. Jake was training as a chef at the same posh hotel where I worked part-time. Even though he was in training, he had been working there for about 5 years and was trusted with some parts of the cooking. One day, probably having heard from other staff, Jake found out about my interest in cooking. He said, "If you'd like, I can teach you. I'm still in training, so I can only show you the basics."
"Really? Thank you so much,"
I replied with a big smile. From then on, we started visiting each other's homes and began our cooking lessons. Since we couldn't use the hotel kitchen, we practiced in our own kitchens. As I learned from him, Jake and I got closer and eventually started dating. After 3 years of dating, we got married. We happily became a married couple. Even after our marriage, Jake continued his training at the high-end hotel. I took a job at a startup that managed multiple restaurants to learn about business management. There, I learned the ropes of running a business. It was a series of challenges, far more intricate than my college classes. I made mistakes countless times and got reprimanded by my bosses. However, as I continued to fail, I gradually accumulated successful experiences. In the end, using the startup company's program, I opened an upscale restaurant. Even though I was an employee, I successfully realized my dream of managing a restaurant. Of course, I chose Jake as the head chef. Jake had just finished his training, so he decided to leave his job at the luxury hotel without any regrets. And that's how Jake and I combined our strengths to run an upscale restaurant. Work is going smoothly, but my personal life has been put on the back burner. I'm so busy that the time I can spend with my grandmother has drastically decreased since my student days. For someone like me, my dependable grandmother now lives with my brother and his wife. My brother, Bob, who is 3 years older than me. However, he's a bit quirky. When I told him about becoming an entrepreneur using the startup company's program, he completely shot down the idea, saying,
"Why are you doing something so high risk? Having a regular job is the most stable. Besides, being a salaried manager doesn't pay much and it's not even worth it." "Come on, Bob, don't you think that's a bit harsh?" "Sure, I'm using the company's program."
I protested against Bob's blunt words. But Bob seemed unwilling to change his stance and continued to argue.
"Listen, Amy. Stability is the key in this world. Yet, you live so recklessly. Your husband's the same, right? Both of you managing a business together is too reckless. If the restaurant fails, you both go down."
"What?" I was taken aback.
"Just remember, if things go south and you end up in debt, don't come running to me. I'm only looking out for Alicia."
I was really shocked by this outburst. In my case, I have the support of my employer, so I'm not incurring any personal debt. But before I could retaliate, my sister-in-law, Alicia, chimed in.
"You and your husband really live on the edge, don't you, Amy? But if things go bad, please don't rely on us."
Hearing this, I resolved never to ask them for help, no matter how tough things got. The reason my grandmother ended up in the care of this couple was due to their unilateral decision and high-handedness. One day, when I visited my grandmother's house where she lived alone, Alicia answered the doorbell and blurted out,
"Why are you here, Amy?"
Surprised to see Alicia there, I asked,
"Why are you here, Alicia? This is my grandmother's house."
Realizing the situation, Alicia replied,
"I've been living here since the other day to take care of Bob's grandmother. Got a problem with that? You're probably too busy with your restaurant anyway, right?"
It was true, I had just started my upscale restaurant and was very busy. I couldn't always be by my grandmother's side. If something happened when Jake and I weren't there, it would be a disaster. On the other hand, Alicia was a housewife and could be with my grandmother during the day. Confidently, she said, "I can be with her." All I could reply was,
"Please take care of her."
After that, I often visited my grandmother's house. Every time I did, Alicia would sarcastically say,
"Again? You need to let go of your grandmother."
Still, I was worried about my grandmother. But this was her house. However, getting into an argument with Alicia, who was living with my grandmother, wasn't a good idea. So, I would say,
"Sorry, I just wanted to see her for a bit,"
and kept visiting my grandmother. Every time I visited, my grandmother seemed happy to see me. But over time, she seemed to be losing her energy, and I was worried. Then, one day, as usual, I found her collapsed at the entrance.
"Grandma, what happened? Hey, stay with me."
I shouted at my grandmother, but there was no response. In a panic, I called an ambulance and rushed to the hospital with my unconscious grandmother.
"She has only 6 months left?"
The doctor's prognosis was devastating. My beloved grandmother was seriously ill. Apparently, the hospital she was brought to was where her primary doctor practiced. According to the doctor, there was nothing more the hospital could do. They could only provide palliative care, and since my grandmother wished to be treated at home, they respected that decision. While I was hearing this devastating news from the doctor, a nurse informed me that my grandmother had woken up.
"Grandma!"
As I entered the hospital room, my grandmother looked in my direction.
"Amy, I'm so sorry. I should have told you earlier,"
Grandma murmured weakly. My eyes began to blur with tears.
"Is it true? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Do Alicia and Bob know?"
Tears streaming down my face, I asked her, and she slowly shook her head in response.
"No one knows. I was planning to just quietly fade away all by myself."
Seeing Grandma like this saddened me deeply. At the same time, I felt that something needed to be done.
"Let's tell Alicia and Bob about it."
Before I knew it, I had made this strong suggestion to her. Grandma seemed taken aback by my sudden proposal. Surely, with a situation as dire as this, even those troublemakers, my brother and his wife, would change their attitudes. At least, that's what I believed. 3 days later, Grandma was discharged from the hospital. But it wasn't a positive kind of discharge. There's simply nothing more the hospital could do for her. Supporting her, I took Grandma back to her house. When we entered her house, which she handed me the keys to, both Bob and Alicia were there, probably because it was Sunday.
Where have you been all this time? Anyway, it's been kind of nice without the old lady around.
Alicia was talking with laughter. Bob grinned and agreed, saying,
Indeed, it's relaxing not having that nagging old lady around.
Our grandma is visibly in a rough shape. Yet, I can't believe they would make such an inappropriate joke in front of her. I got so angry that I snapped back at them.
Both of you, cut it out. Grandma is sick and has only 6 months to live. She can barely stand now. How can you say such things?
When I shouted, they both seemed taken aback for a moment. But soon Bob, with a cynical laugh, muttered, You're kidding, right? Alicia didn't seem to believe it either. She smirked and looked at me. So, I told them with a stern face.
Sadly, it's true. If you think it's a lie, why don't you ask Grandma's primary physician?
Grandma, with her weak voice, also added, I really do have only 6 months. I imagine I won't be able to do many things soon. Upon hearing this, Alicia's face twisted. What? So, I have to take care of her? I don't want to deal with that. I just came to this house to save on rent. I absolutely don't want to care for her. Old lady, just leave now. Alicia waved her hand, shooing Grandma away. Tears formed in Grandma's eyes.
We don't need you, old lady. Amy will take care of you,
Alicia said smugly. Probably, as long as she gets the house, she doesn't care about Grandma. Bob was also smirking as he watched me and Grandma. He seemed to have no feelings for our grandma. She won't be happy in this place. So, I declared. It's okay, Grandma. I'll be by your side. I quickly countered.
This is Grandma's house. And she wishes to spend her last moments here.
However, Alicia stood her ground. Sorry, Amy. I've always known that Bob and Alicia have bad attitudes, but I never thought it would come to this. Grandma apologized repeatedly. She seemed on the verge of tears, her shoulders trembling. Seeing her like that hurt me. But Alicia looked at us with pure disdain. Can you leave now? You're in the way. Also, don't come to us for help later, even if you regret it. We won't help you, not even with a cent. She sighed deeply, looking very annoyed. Really? I definitely won't be taking care of Grandma. Don't expect us to look after her. Bob said, grimacing. It's Alicia and Bob who have imposed themselves on Grandma's home and been a burden. Yet, now that they know about her limited time left, they want to throw her out. I've come to truly despise Bob and Alicia. So, I responded for the last time.
I won't have anything to do with Bob or Alicia anymore. I'm gonna cut ties with you as family. If you regret it later, that's on you.
It seemed Grandma had also been bottling up her feelings about them, as she whispered. I won't see you two ever again. Goodbye.
If we cut ties, it'll be easier when you end up in a lot of debt,
Bob said with a chuckle.
Exactly,
Alicia added.
If Amy ends up drowning in debt, it has nothing to do with us since we've cut ties. So, good luck with taking care of the frail old lady and dealing with your debt.
Ignoring Alicia's sarcastic wave, Grandma and I left the house. I brought Grandma to my home. As she stepped out of the taxi, she remarked, What a lovely house. In fact, our house is more than twice the size of Grandma's. Thanks to the company's policy, Jake and I, who run an upscale restaurant, receive not only a regular salary but also a special bonus. We get a cashback from the restaurant's profits. It's a unique system of our company. This system, which is like running an independent business, aims to motivate employees. Indeed, thanks to this policy, Jake and I receive a good income from the company with low risk. Our take-home pay is much higher than Bob's, who's just a regular worker. As I thought about that, the front door opened.
Hello.
Jake greeted me with a smile. I had informed Jake via email beforehand, and he was waiting at home to welcome our grandmother. Jake has been so busy with work that he hasn't had the chance to visit, so today is a long-awaited reunion with our grandmother. Our grandmother looks extremely happy to see Jake. He quickly ushered her into the living room and served some tea. Sipping her tea, grandmother seemed to relax a bit. For the past 6 months, I feel like I can finally live happily. I felt so out of place in that house. Grandmother muttered quietly. According to her, Alicia and her family had been neglecting grandmother all along. They wouldn't even cook her portion of the meals, and sometimes Alicia even took grandma's pension as part of the household expenses.
That's awful.
I blurted out. Jake looked upset as well. After a moment of heavy silence, Jake, with determination, stood up and said, "I'm gonna do something about this. We should give them a taste of their own medicine. I can't stand being pushed around like this. I'd regret not standing up for grandmother." I got up as well and said, "We'll make sure they regret it." And so, we took a stand. A few days after we took action, my phone was flooded with calls from Bob's number. Even when ignored, the calls kept coming.
I knew this would happen.
I murmured. After letting it ring for quite some time, I finally answered. "Yes?"
Finally! What the hell did you do?
As soon as I answered, Alicia, sounding frantic, began questioning me. I figured she was using Bob's phone. "What are you talking about?" "I have no idea." I knew exactly what she was getting at, but I played dumb. Alicia, losing patience, pressed on.
"That's about Grandma's house. Suddenly, a real estate agent is demanding we vacate. Did you have something to do with this? It's our house now, mind your own business."
Alicia sounded cornered and irritated. Ignoring her outburst, I calmly responded. "Well, Grandma just sold her house. What's the problem?" Just because Alicia and her family lived there, they assumed ownership, but the house was still in grandmother's name. I don't get why they felt entitled to it. Alicia, sounding even more flustered, shot back.
"Why did she sell it? We're living there. Is this some sort of revenge? Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you have to be envious."
She didn't seem to believe the house had been sold. This was going nowhere. So I decided to lay out the facts for Alicia. It's true. The sale is already finalized. The property now belongs to the realtor. If you continue to stay there, it'll be trespassing. Alicia sounded completely lost for words. Turns out, after Jake and I decided to act, he went to a real estate agency with grandmother's power of attorney. They quickly moved through the selling process. By the way, when we explained the situation to Grandma, she was completely on board and signed the papers right away.
"I definitely don't want to hand the house over to Bob and his family,"
Grandmother had said, her face turning red with anger, which showed just how upset she was. As I explained the situation, Alicia began to panic on the other end.
"So suddenly? Where are we supposed to live now? We even gave up our previous apartment."
And with that, she broke down over the phone. Actually, according to what my grandma told me, Alicia, despite being a stay-at-home mom, was quite the big spender. She'd casually buy designer handbags and never missed her monthly spa treatments. Bob is just an office worker and definitely not earning a high salary. Because of that, it seemed like Alicia and him were struggling to make ends meet. Alicia had pre-existing debts, and their finances were a real mess. Under normal circumstances, that would be grounds for divorce, but Bob is too smitten with Alicia. Probably because she's a beauty. So, on Bob's suggestion, to save on rent, they both moved into my grandmother's house. But to be honest, I couldn't care less about their situation.
"I don't know why you came to me. Why don't you just stay in a motel or something until you find a new place? Oh wait, you're broke, right?
I said sarcastically to Alicia. She seemed to think I had no idea about their financial struggles. Suddenly she looked panicked and whispered,
How did you know?
Bob, perhaps not wanting this to be known, just kept quiet. Then, my grandmother chimed in.
I told her.
She continued.
Amy and Jake's home is really comfortable. It's spacious and clean, with all the latest appliances. It's worlds apart from where you lived before.
And she chuckled. Bob immediately bit back.
What the hell? How come you guys have money? Weren't you drowning in debt?
His pride seemed hurt, and he was shouting in disbelief. I kindly informed him.
Aside from our salaries, we also get a percentage of the profits.
So, I believe we earn significantly more than you. Plus, we're a two-income household. We probably make double what you do, easy.
No way.
Bob seemed stunned on the other end of the line. You always said being a salaried worker was the right path. Turns out, we're living a much wealthier life than you. You really had tunnel vision, didn't you? I couldn't help but laugh. I could hear Bob growling over the phone. Upon realizing our affluence, Alicia started to butter me up.
Then can we stay at your place, Amy? If your house is that big, there should be room for us, right?
What a ridiculous proposal. I promptly declined.
Absolutely not. Didn't you specifically ask us not to rely on you? We've cut ties with you guys, so don't come crawling back now. Find your own way.
With that, I hung up. They've tried calling multiple times since, but I just ignore them. I never want to have anything to do with people like Bob and Alicia again. I hope they realize and regret their actions. Eventually, I heard they were caught shoplifting. The police contacted me, and I got to know about it. Apparently, Alicia's debt had snowballed to a point where Bob's salary alone couldn't cover it. Alicia even seemed to be taking her grandmother's pension. Debt collectors started showing up at Bob's workplace, which led to his debts being exposed and him getting fired. With no income, repaying their debts became even harder. Bob and Alicia seemed to have been struggling even for daily meals. As a result, they apparently shoplifted sandwiches and bread from a convenience store, and the store's staff reported them, leading to their arrest. Seems they've hit rock bottom. According to the police, they wanted me as their guarantor.
I messed up. I'm sorry, just look out for us.
Bob pleaded. But it's too little too late. Even Alicia, who usually had no regrets, seemed genuinely remorseful.
Please help us. I'll apologize for everything. Just give us a hand.
I heard Alicia has been pleading this way through the police. But this whole mess started because of Alicia's reckless spending. Bob being oblivious was also a problem. They brought this upon themselves. And after what they did to my dear grandmother, I can never forgive them. They can keep struggling for all I care. 3 months have passed since then. My grandmother is still alive and well. Which brings me so much joy. I took a caregiving leave and have been staying by her side. There's a real advantage to having a flexible job. Even though she has her tough moments, on her good days, we can walk around the garden together. These times are the most enjoyable and therapeutic for me. Grandma, your birthday's coming up. Is there anything you'd like to eat? I asked her. She responded,
Maybe a cake baked by you, Amy.
Even now, she tries to make me feel better about my subpar cooking skills, and it really tugs at my heartstrings. I still want to be with my grandma, and I feel I haven't done enough for her. Every day, I want to make even just a little more memories with her. And I plan to be by her side for as long as she's with us.